There is a patch of land on this planet, roughly the size of Greater London, that sits between two recognized countries, on a continent where almost every square kilometer has been carved up, legislated, and defended by someone. It has mountains. It has dry riverbeds. Nomadic peoples have crossed it for centuries. And yet, as of today, not a single nation on Earth will claim it as its own. Not the country to its north. Not the country to its south. Not anyone. That place is called Bir Tawil. And the reason no one claims it is not that no one knows it exists. They know. They just can't afford to want it. Bir Tawil sits in the Nubian desert of northeastern Africa, wedged precisely between southern Egypt and northern Sudan. It covers about 2,060 square kilometers, around 795 square miles, making it larger than the island nation of Bahrain. Its northern edge stretches roughly 95 kilometers along the 22nd parallel. Its southern edge narrows to about 46 kilometers. It is a quadrilateral, not a triangle, though it is often called one by mistake. The terrain is what you'd expect from a landlocked desert, flat gravel plains giving way to wind-worn rock, dry wadis that only carry water during rare and violent storms, and in the east, a volcanic ridge called Jabal Hagar el-Zarqa that rises to 662 meters above sea level, the highest point in the territory. There is no permanent surface water anywhere in Bir Tawil. None. For roughly 3/4 of the year, temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius. In the peak summer months of June, July, and August, the thermometer can reach 45 degrees. The name Bir Tawil, in Arabic, literally means tall water well, which tells you something about how scarce and precious water is here. Scarce enough that the single fact of a reliable well was enough to name an entire territory after it. So why does a place this harsh, this landlocked, this waterless sit completely unclaimed by anyone in the modern world? The answer starts not in the desert itself, but in a series of offices in London at the turn of the 20th century, and in a peculiar problem that the British Empire created, probably without realizing it would last for more than 100 years. In 1882, Britain intervened militarily in Egypt, effectively taking control of the country. At that time, Egypt administered what is now Sudan as part of a single territory. The British found themselves governing both at once. Then, in 1899, they drew a clean, simple political boundary between the two territories, a straight line following the 22nd parallel north. Everything south of that line was Sudan. Everything north of it was Egypt. The logic was elegant and imperial, a ruler-drawn line across a map in a conference room, with no particular concern for the people living on either side of it. But within 3 years, the British realized the 1899 line created a practical problem. The desert tribes living in the region did not organize their lives around lines of latitude. They organized around water, pasture, and ancestral routes. Two groups in particular mattered here. The Ababda people, based near Aswan in the Egyptian Nile Valley, had long used the land south of the 22nd parallel, what would become Bir Tawil, as seasonal grazing ground. Meanwhile, a different triangle of territory to the northeast, called the Hala'ib Triangle, was inhabited by groups culturally and practically linked to Khartoum in Sudan, not to Cairo. So in 1902, the British drew a second border, an administrative boundary, that swapped administrative responsibility for both areas to better reflect how people actually lived. Under the 1902 line, Bir Tawil went to Egypt's administration because the Ababda who used it were based near Aswan. The Hala'ib Triangle, roughly 10 times the size of Bir Tawil and with access to the Red Sea coast, went to Sudan's administration. Two maps, two borders, the 1899 line and the 1902 line. While both territories were governed under British authority, the difference barely mattered. But in 1956, Sudan gained its independence, and the moment it did, that small cartographic discrepancy turned into a crisis that has never been resolved. Here is where the geometry becomes the trap. The Hala'ib Triangle is roughly 20,580 square kilometers. It has a coastline on the Red Sea. It has resources. It has a fixed population. It is worth fighting over. And both Egypt and Sudan want it. Egypt's position is that the correct border is the 1899 line, the clean 22nd parallel. Under that line, the Hala'ib Triangle belongs to Egypt. But here is the catch. The 1899 line also places Bir Tawil inside Sudan. If Egypt claims the 1899 border to get Hala'ib, it must give Bir Tawil to Sudan. Sudan's position is the mirror image. Sudan says the correct border is the 1902 administrative line. Under that line, Hala'ib belongs to Sudan. But the 1902 line also places Bir Tawil inside Egypt. If Sudan claims the 1902 border to get Hala'ib, it must give Bir Tawil to Egypt. Every country chooses the border that gives it Hala'ib, which means every country simultaneously disowns Bir Tawil. The two maps cancel each other out, and in the gap between them, Bir Tawil falls through, a piece of land belonging, legally, to no one. The very act of claiming it is a political concession neither side will make. Claiming Bir Tawil means surrendering Hala'ib, and neither Egypt nor Sudan will do that. The result is what international lawyers call Terra nullius, Latin for nobody's land. And in the modern world, where almost every corner of the planet has been claimed, legislated, and defended, Bir Tawil is, as of this writing, the only territory of significant size outside Antarctica that is both habitable and unclaimed by any recognized government on Earth. For decades, this was mostly a footnote, a curiosity on maps. The territory was used seasonally by nomadic Ababda and Bishari peoples, whose routes across the eastern desert long predated any colonial border. The Ababda in particular had grazed cattle and camels across this land for centuries, following hidden water wells and seasonal pastures by knowledge passed down through generations. In their worldview, land is not a rigid political possession but part of a living environment, linked by routes of water, pasture, and memory. They did not need a government to validate their presence. They simply were there, as they had always been. But in 2014, Bir Tawil went global. That year, an American farmer from Virginia named Jeremiah Heaton made a journey across the desert and, upon arriving, planted a flag. He claimed the territory as a new sovereign nation, naming it the Kingdom of North Sudan. His stated reason was, genuinely, to make his 7-year-old daughter an official princess, as she had always dreamed. The story spread worldwide. Media covered it breathlessly. A documentary followed. There were even early discussions about a Disney film deal. Heaton became simultaneously celebrated and criticized, celebrated for the whimsy, criticized because the logic he used to justify his claim, that the land was empty and therefore available, was the same logic European colonial powers had used for centuries to erase indigenous peoples from their own territories. The Ababda, who had been moving through that desert for generations, were not considered in the equation. Heaton's declaration was the crack that opened the flood. Over the years that followed, a series of individuals from around the world declared their own sovereignties over Bir Tawil. In 2017, an Indian entrepreneur named Suyash Dixit traveled to the territory and announced the Kingdom of Dixit on social media, triggering a wave of coverage. Literally one day later, a Russian DJ named Dmitry Zikarev claimed the same land as the Kingdom of Middle-earth, inspired, yes, by Tolkien. The claims kept coming. Online declarations proliferated. Websites appeared with flags, constitutions, and national anthems for countries that exist only on someone's laptop. None of these claims has been recognized by any government or international organization. Not one. The 1933 Montevideo Convention sets out the basic requirements for statehood: a permanent population, a defined territory, an effective government, and the capacity to enter into international relations. Planting a flag in the sand does not satisfy a single one of them. More recently, a more formally organized entity called the Principality of Bir Tawil has emerged, led by a figure named Giovanni Caparazzo Gottlieb, who claims the backing of local Ababda and Bishari leaders. The The principality claimed a census of over 3,000 citizens in 2024 and submitted a formal request to the United Nations for observer state status in January 2025. As of this writing, that request remains unacknowledged by the UN. No established state has recognized the claim. The international community has shown no sign of treating it differently from any of its predecessors. Meanwhile, something else has been changing on the ground. Something quieter and considerably more consequential than flag-planting adventurers. Gold. Over the past 2 decades, a surge of artisanal and small-scale gold mining has swept across northeastern Africa. Reports from travelers and regional observers describe unregulated mining camps operating inside Bir Tawil, part of a broader pattern that has transformed vast stretches of Sudan and the surrounding region. The miners use mercury to process the ore, binding it with crushed rock, then burning it off to isolate the gold. The technique works. It also leaves behind a toxic environmental legacy that, in a territory with no government, no regulator, no environmental agency, and no enforcement mechanism, goes entirely unchecked. There is no authority to monitor groundwater contamination, no agency to track soil toxicity, no court to hear a complaint. The absence of sovereignty that makes Bir Tawil a curiosity in a geography classroom makes it a vacuum of accountability in the real world. There have also been reports, troubling ones, that Sudan's ongoing civil war has pushed weapons dealers and armed groups to operate inside Bir Tawil specifically because it falls under no jurisdiction. When a territory has no government, it offers no law, and the absence of law attracts those who prefer it that way. All of this paints a picture very different from the romantic notion of unclaimed land as a blank canvas for a utopian nation-state. What Bir Tawil actually is, on the ground, is a place where the Ababda have quietly asserted their own authority. When a travel operator ran tours to Bir Tawil in 2019, and again more recently, their groups were met by armed Ababda men and escorted to tribal elders. The message from those elders was clear: this land is ours, not yours, not any online kings. The people who live and move here have never stopped exercising a kind of sovereignty that predates any of the borders drawn in 1899 or 1902. They simply do not have a seat at any international table. So what happens next? The fate of Bir Tawil is ultimately not about Bir Tawil at all. It is about Hala'ib. Whatever resolves the Hala'ib dispute will, almost as a side effect, resolve Bir Tawil's status too. And there may, finally, be movement. In November 2025, Sudan's Sovereign Council reportedly ordered state bodies to begin treating the Hala'ib Triangle as Egyptian territory, a quiet, unofficial concession that Sudan may be preparing to let go of its Hala'ib claim. If that process continues and Sudan formally accepts the 1899 border, then the 1902 line falls away, and Bir Tawil, under that reading, belongs to Egypt. Overnight, the world's most famous no-man's land would simply cease to be one. But that moment has not arrived. As of now, Bir Tawil remains exactly what it has been for over a century, a product of 2 lines drawn by a colonial power, each one canceling the other out, leaving a patch of desert in permanent legal freefall. It is a place that is real, inhabited by people with a legitimate historical connection to the land, and simultaneously invisible to every government on Earth. There is a word that gets used a lot in discussions of Bir Tawil: curiosity. A geographic curiosity, a legal curiosity, a cartographic anomaly. But what Bir Tawil actually represents is something larger and more uncomfortable than a curiosity. It is a demonstration of how lines drawn in distant rooms, by people who never visited the land and never planned to, can trap a place in legal limbo for more than 100 years, and how the absence of formal sovereignty does not mean the absence of people, or history, or consequence. The world is full of places that carry the fingerprints of decisions made long ago by people long gone. Bir Tawil is one of the few places where you can still see, with perfect clarity, exactly how those decisions were made. And what happens when two of them contradict each other?